everybody, welcome back to Bentley House. I'm Ara, and you might be wondering, Ara, I thought we were going to talk about the miniatures weekend and how it went, and we are, but that's going to be next week. I came home and I really wanted to do something super relaxing, and for me, that is painting. And luckily, about a month ago, a company called Arteza contacted me and wanted to send me a few free products to try out. So I very excitedly said yes. The products arrived, and today I'm going to do something I've been wanting to do for a while, which is paint some Adam's portraits. Arteza is not sponsoring this video, and I do not have any affiliate links below, so I'm going to be giving my real, true, honest opinion about the products. However, they did send me a coupon code in case these products sound like something you might be interested in. So you can find that in the description box below. This video is going to be a little bit of a long one, so let's just get started. Alright, so let's review these Arteza products that I received. And I'll get them out of the plastic pretty quick so that they aren't continuing to just shine you in the face. But I wanted to show you how they arrive. And these are the 15 miniature brushes. And I'm very excited to try these out. And the other thing they sent me were 20 outdoor acrylic colors, and I didn't realize that they were outdoor. They kind of sent me a list of things, and I figured that the best things for me to try would be paint and brushes because I use that on almost every project. But I did not realize they were outdoor acrylic colors, so I don't know if this will be any different from the regular acrylic colors. They come in this box, and the side says they're water-based, scuff-resistant, self-sealing, indoor and outdoor use, non-toxic. Let's see. Shake well before each use. Use a brush or sponge to apply 1 to 2 coats depending on desired opacity. Let dry for 72 hours. Easy cleanup with soap and water. Alright, so let's open this up because this is what I'm really excited about, seeing all the different colors. And I'll put the price for what this entire box was. So I'll pull these all out so that we can look at them while I am painting. I'm going to go ahead and get out the brushes. So there's 15 in here, and they all do seem to have a little bit of a different top to them, so that may be helpful. And I know sometimes finding smaller brushes can be hard, so if these work really well, that's exciting. First impressions, it looks like it's got a wood handle, wood painted handle, and I think this is a plastic edge, and of course they're synthetic fibers. It does look like one might be just a tiny bit frayed, but the rest of them look like they're in good order. Okay, I've got my clean-ish palette. For me, this is probably as clean as it gets. And I'm just going to try out some colors so that you guys can see how they look. I got the seals off, and it says to shake them really well, so I'm going to follow directions. It's interesting that I'm shaking it, but I don't really feel like the paint is moving inside. Usually when I shake an acrylic paint, it's real watery sounding, like you can hear the paint in there, but I couldn't hear these, so it'll be interesting to see this consistency. I'm just going to put out a little bit. It's very thick. Because it was talking about using 1 to 2 coats depending on desired opacity, I was really expecting it to be thinner. But it's more thick than my typical craft paints, which I'm not mad about. I kind of like thicker paints. And this is what the paints look like. Like I said, pretty thick, because if this was my little craft acrylic paints, this purple would be dripping down into here and it'd be a puddle in the bottom, but they are pretty thick. So this is a pretty long, thin tip, but it has a very sharp point on it, so I'm hoping it can get some pretty good detail. Okay, so when you put it down, it does look a little bit thinner. But still has pretty good color. So I'll take a little bit of that purple paint, add some water. Let's see what we can do here. So if you work with it with the water, it will kind of get a little bit thinner and a little bit smoother as you apply it. Arteza did not send me this brush, but I wanted to try it out with a little bit thicker brush and see how that looked. So here's what I have so far, and I'm going to try out the other two colors because I know sometimes different colors act different ways. But yeah, let me do that right now. Alright, here's all three of the colors I picked out. I do like how the yellow performed, probably the best, but you know, I'm going to reserve final judgment until after I work on a project with them. And the last thing I want to test out before I actually get started on the project I have for today is mixing them together. So I'm going to mix the yellow and the blue, try to get a green, and see how well the colors mix together. So we got more of a sap green with this color, but it did mix pretty easily and pretty thoroughly, so I'm not upset about that either. Here are all the colors out of the box so that you can see what comes with it. And most important, we have a black, and we have a white, and we have a few brownish colors, which I like to see. And we do have a gray, and we have some other colors mixed in between. We have the, let's see, we have the primary colors, and then we have a few other ones. So a couple different yellows, a couple different blues, some different greens. More of a skin tone here, so a couple purples. Not a bad set with a gold and a silver. So I am going to be making some Addams Family portraits, which, as you can tell, some of these colors are not going to work very well for that, but it will be interesting with such a bright set to try and make something appropriate for my project. So this will involve a lot of mixing and just using the product to the best of my ability. Since I'm making portraits that are probably about that size or so, I will be making use of the miniature brushes, and at the very end I will tell you guys what I think about the products. So let's get started. Okay, before I get started with the art, there's something I wanted to point out, and I was thinking it was taking these forever to dry because they were still shiny, but they are dry, but they dried with just a little bit of shine on them. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but it keeps the ridges in the paint similar to oil paint. And since I was hoping that these paintings that I'm going to create will look like they're oil paintings, this may actually be a really good product for me to use. I'll just have to see if I can, if I have the ability to use this property of it keeping the ridges to my advantage. So I don't know if you guys can see that. Hopefully on that purple you can see how it kept the little ridges of paint. So it gives that kind of 3D effect that you get with oil painting. Now I know on the box it said 72 hours to dry, but it dried really, really quickly, and I think maybe that's 72 hours until you're able to put it outside, because it did say it was an outdoor paint. So we're going to give this a try. And the first thing I'm going to do is grab my cardstock. I'm going to be doing 4 different paintings. 3 of them are the same size. One is going to be a little bit smaller. And the way that I set up my canvas, I don't like the actual like real life canvas texture in miniature. I think the canvas sorry, my kid's in the background. I don't think that the canvas texture looks in scale. So what I do is I use a little bit of white gesso on top of cardstock just to prepare my surface for paint. So I'm going to add some gesso over this, let it dry, and then I should have 4 painting surfaces. Now what I'm painting is I went back to my Charles Addams book and I found this example of one of his drawings with some Addams Family portraits in there, and I think he's just great at making things just look a little bit off. And so I'm going to use these as my inspiration. I'm not going to copy them directly. Obviously I'm going to be adding color, so they're going to look different from this anyway, but I thought what's more perfect than going back to Charles Addams' original cartoons for some inspiration. Here's the gesso on the surface, and then I'm just going to let it dry before I draw on what I think I'm going to be painting. So I've got my brushes ready to go, I've got my painting surface prepared, and I went ahead and sketched on the images that I am looking to paint. And they're very similar to the ones in the Addams cartoon, but I did add a few things like a vulture to the Uncle Fester looking portrait. I've got my paints over here so I can see all the colors I have available to me, and I am ready to get started. So the first thing I want to start with is the background, and I went ahead and made a wash with some water and put down flat color, and this is how I'm going to start every single piece. I just go ahead and put down a flat color, and then later on I will go back and add in some highlights and shadows. So the first thing I'm noticing is that there's a very big difference between using the paint with water and without water. And using it with water makes it very thin and almost takes away the shine. And using it without water leaves it very chunky, and you have to really work to cover the surface. So these are some interesting differences that I'm seeing, but I'm still going to try to use them together to make a full portrait. And I'm not quite sure where we skipped some footage here, but I do show you the full painting of the rest of them, so I'm not quite sure what happened there. But I'm going to continue on. At the moment it's not looking super great, but I go ahead and add a second layer. That was just my first layer. And I go ahead and redo the background because it was looking a little bit thin, and then I'm going to use the paints to add some shadows around the face and to then add some highlights on the tops of the shoulders, top of the hand, and a few little highlights around the face, and this just helps the painting pop out a little bit. I found that the brushes were working great. I could get quite a bit of detail in there, very small. Obviously these paintings are pretty small, so I was happy with the amount of detail that I was able to get. So here's my finished first portrait, and I was pretty happy with how it turned out. And you can see as I'm trying to move it back and forth that the paint still has that texture. You can see the brush strokes, and I really like that. The only problem I had so far is that one of the lids of the paints broke, and it's kind of a bummer, but you know, I do think these bottles are just a little bit cheaply made, but obviously they're trying to keep the cost of paint down. This is 20 paints for under $40, so I understand that, but it's a bummer because now I can't close that lid without some tape. But ultimately, and I mean that's the only one that happened, so you know, it could be a fluke. But I'm going to keep painting. I'm going to paint these other three guys, and I'm going to kind of do a speed paint of that so you can follow along. But I'm really enjoying these so far, so I'm just going to keep going. So for this lady, when I looked at the original one in the cartoon, there didn't seem to be anything very strange about her, and so I decided to go ahead and give her a very light green skin tone, maybe kind of homage to like the Wicked Witch of the West or something like that. But it was in this painting that I realized that the paints really do well mixing together, because none of these tones that I'm using, none of these colors that I'm using in this painting are straight from the bottle, and I really enjoyed mixing and trying to pull out the colors that I could from the existing colors. And I also found that the colors I mixed continued to stay really bright and vibrant. I feel like there's a lot of really nice pigment. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention here is that because these colors are self-sealing, I did have a little bit of an issue whenever I tried to put a wash on top of a dried layer of paint. It did feel like it just kind of sat on the surface a little bit, and so I just had to play with it, but eventually once it dried, everything looked good. But I did feel that I was kind of painting on top of a sealed surface after each layer had dried. But once it's all dry, it all kind of stayed together. I don't know if this is making sense, but in the end it works out. But it was just a process of trying to figure out how to use these paints because they are a very different feel from the typical acrylics. I was really happy with how the lady turned out. She does look a little bit younger than in the original portrait, and of course I added color, which isn't in the original either. So for this guy, I decided I wanted to use some of the vibrant blues for the background, and in a bit you'll see that I do tone that down just a little bit. It was just a little bit too vibrant for the Adams feel, but I went with a gray skin tone for him, and I really just wanted to kind of play with the colors and just put in as much as I could while still keeping the spooky, ominous feel that I really wanted. And I will tell you that it was about this point when it dawned on me what these paints are probably made for. My guess is that they are made for painting on rocks. Like there was that craze of painting rocks and putting them out in parks for people to go search for and find. And honestly, like, I think that's great. I think it's really fun. It's like public art that you can take home. But I'm guessing that this is what these are for. They're for painting rocks, and that's why they're self-sealing. That's why you can use them outside. And then I did realize in the list of items that Arteza sent me to choose from, there were like some wood blocks in there, or like wood slices, which are really, really cool, but probably not useful for me and my projects. So that made sense more now that I'm thinking about it, that you could do some kind of outdoor artwork, something for maybe like a fairy garden, anyway, something like that. But of course, I never use art supplies really as they are intended. I like to find different ways to use them, interesting ways that they can be used in miniatures. So anyway, I just thought it was funny that it just dawned on me what these paints are for. But I really am enjoying them, using them as like faux oil paints. I'm going to talk about the art now. The little guy at the gallows, the Frankenstein looking guy, he ended up being my favorite. I really love how he turned out. I love the expression on his face, and it just looks like he's like posing there at the gallows, ready for his portrait to be painted. And now I'm on to the Uncle Fester portrait, and of course this one I added in a vulture because supposedly in the movie they mentioned that Uncle Fester has a pet vulture, so I wanted to add him in there just for a little bit more interest to this portrait. And this one's a little bit smaller because I wanted to push the ability of the detail brushes to see how small I could paint, but they did awesome. And here where I wrote foreshadowing in the beginning of this video, I do end up using this really bright pink, but I mix it with some cream to create the skin tone for the vulture, and I really love how that turned out. And honestly, just the vibrancy of these paints were really, really exciting, and I can see why they would do really well for outdoor rock painting, because they would just like shine in the grass or in the field or wherever you share your rock art. But for my purposes, I had so much fun painting these, and I will be using these paints again to create some other portraits. And I love just the little bit of shine that it gives. It's not a crazy amount of shine, it's just a little bit of shine. But yeah, these portraits turned out well, I think. I really enjoyed putting them together. I do wish that somewhere on the box or on the bottle that they would write that these paints are glossy. As for me, as a miniaturist, it's really important for me to know how my products are going to end up looking. Obviously, it worked out in this situation, but if I had wanted these to be a matte finish, I would have been a little disappointed to know that my only option was a glossy finish. So I just wish that that was on the box. If I had bought these with my money and it didn't say anywhere that it was glossy or kind of semi-glossy, I think I would have been a little sad. But obviously for this I'm happy, and now I can share with you guys. If you are interested in these paints, they do have a little bit of a shine. I'm also happy with the self-sealing aspect of it. I do get a little bit nervous when I paint something and I have to go and choose a sealer for it. I'm always worried that I could mess up the paint or it might have a finish that I don't want on it. So I am happy that I don't have to worry about these paintings. They are self-sealed and they are protected. So that is a really cool aspect of these paints. As for the brushes, they worked fine. I really only ended up using 6 out of the 15 brushes, so I do feel like there's like a lot of brushes in here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide them up into 2 groups. I'm going to keep one in my travel miniature bag that I take to like classes, and then I'll leave the other group here in my office, so I'll always have a set with me where I go. But they worked well, and I think as long as you take care of them and clean them after every use, they should probably last a while. So obviously no portrait is complete without a beautiful frame. And in the example I showed you where they were hung on the wall, they were all framed beautifully. So I'm going to show you how I frame these. What I do is I line it up and tape it down on my cutting mat, which has the straight lines. It doesn't look straight on the camera, but they are straight. And I'm going to use my ruler, and I'm using a white gel pen to mark out the part of the portraits that I want to make sure that I see. So I'll have a nice straight rectangle around each portrait. Now some of you might cringe at this because I am going to build the frame straight on top of the portrait so that the frame is inseparable from this piece of art. I know a lot of people might tell you to build the frame separately so it could be removed, but I don't plan on removing these at all ever, so I'm just going to build the frame straight onto my paintings, and I feel like that is the best way that I've found to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these out, and I'm leaving between a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch edge alongside my paintings, and this is because I need room to build the frame on top of the painting. I do try to get them as even as possible, but if there are any papers that stick out beyond the frame, it's really easy just to cut it off, and I will show you that. So I go ahead and use my straight edge cutter just to get each of the individual portraits separated. Now I have some 1/16 inch mat board, and I'm going to take my tacky glue and glue it onto the mat board. This is going to be the back of my frame, and this is what's going to give it that rigidity so that I know that my painting's not going to get dented or curve after it's all put together. So I'm going to press down really hard on that and make sure that it's all evenly glued to the mat board, and I have all 4 of the portraits glued down to the mat board. I've never tried painting directly on mat board, but it is something I might try in the future. So now I have all my pieces. I'm going to take my gigantic supply of craft wood and go ahead and make a frame. I'm going to show you how I frame one of these. The other ones are just made from different widths of wood, and pretty much once you know how to do a simple frame, you can add on whatever details you want. So this is your typical popsicle stick. I'm just going to line it up along one side, take my pencil and mark at the edges of the rectangle that I drew. This is my easy cutter tool. I always get questions about this, so I will leave a link in the description box below to an Amazon thing so that you can find it. But this is really easy to make 45-degree cuts. You just turn it and cut away at the wood. And so I'm going to make 2 45-degree cuts that are starting at the mark that I created by using the rectangle that I drew on my portrait. So I'll show you how that fits on after I cut it. So those 2 inside pieces fit right along that edge. I'm going to do this for each edge of my portrait until I have 4 pieces that will create a frame. Now I typically start gluing the long sides on first. This is just the way that I do it. And once those are glued on, then I will make sure that my top and bottom pieces fit, and if they don't fit exactly, I can either recut them or just cut them down slightly if they need to be a little bit smaller. But you want a nice tight fit for the frame. You don't want huge gaps in the corners. So that is a pretty easy way to do it, and then once it's all glued on and you know that it's framed correctly, if you have any edges sticking out, all I do is I just take my X-Acto knife and cut at the edge. And then I have a completed frame. Obviously this doesn't look exactly like the frames in Adam's family house, but I noticed on my drawing mat that these paints get really hard, and once they dry, and they keep their shape, like I said in the beginning. So I had an idea to make like the tiniest piping bag in the world, and I'm going to use some of this paint to create a texture on the frame. So I put some into a very small bag, and I cut the very corner tip off, and I'm just going to basically use it like a piping bag, and I'm going to just put lines and shapes and designs. And granted, I don't come up with the best designs for these, but I was just kind of experimenting. These are just supposed to be fun little projects, but as you can see, it looks kind of like a line of mustard up there in the corner. But once it dries, I go ahead and I'm going to use the gold color from the Arteza set. And because the paint is really thick, I'm not adding any water. It kind of fills in the gaps and just makes it look kind of like a gilded frame. Like I said, my patterns are not the best, but I really like the effect, and I think the more I practice with this, the better I could get at making a really fancy looking frame. Now, if you're wondering how I paint the insides, I just put down a little post-it, and then I just use that edge to paint along the inside to protect the painting. And then of course, you know me, I've got to age it. I'm using just regular craft paint that has a flat finish to it to go ahead and put in some black color, and just going to rub that around into all the creases. This is going to help the design kind of stick out and age the frame. So here's the final one that I showed you how it's created. Also, I made sure I put gold around the outside edge so that when you look at the frame from the side, it looks good. Here's another one. This one's a simple one I just made with some different types of wood for Uncle Fester, but I still used the Arteza gold paint on it to make it look gilded. This one, I did the same technique as the first one, but I used the silver instead of the gold, and I do really like how that turned out too. And then my final one is still my favorite one. I used the black Arteza paint, and then I just rubbed a little bit of the silver on top to pull out those details, and I really love how that one turned out. So I think I got better as I went along. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I had so much fun using these paints. Remember that Arteza sent me a coupon code if you're interested in trying them out for yourselves. Remember, they do not act like typical acrylic paints, so give yourself, if you do try them, just a little bit of time to get used to the thickness, to how they work when they're thinned out. Just give yourself that time to learn the paints, but in the end, I had so much fun with them. I did put some pictures here of how they look in the hallway. I do think I will kind of spread them out throughout the house so I don't have just one really cartoony looking hallway, but I think there'll be such a fun pop of color and interest in my project that really brings in that Charles Addams original charm. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave me a comment below, let me know what you think. Leave this video a like if you had fun. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't. I do a new video every week. We always have a lot of fun, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye! Oh, don't forget, in the next one we're going to be talking about the miniatures showcase. It was really fun. Okay, bye.